Good morning, all, and welcome. I'm Kashish, and I have my colleague Scott here with me, and we are from the service team's Security Hub, which is part of the Security Services org within AWS. Today, we are here to talk about the new Security Hub that we just introduced yesterday. We'll take a few minutes to talk about what were the main key customer problems that we heard over the last few years, which led to building this new Security Hub. Then we're going to talk about what are the key capabilities of the new Security Hub. We're going to do a demo, and then we'll end up with a quick Q&A. We'll do a Q&A on the stage, and then we can also hang out afterwards if you have more questions. So, we are happy to talk to you after the session also. So to start with, let's see what were the key challenges that customers were facing that we have heard over the years. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, relate to that also. The first one that we continuously heard was that security is fragmented. Within AWS, we still have multiple services, different consoles, different APIs, like Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, the existing AWS Security Hub, and we'll talk about what happens to the existing Security Hub, and so forth and so on. And customers consistently told us, we want a single place to get security. We don't want to figure out what we need to make our AWS environment secure. And overall, they just kept telling us, we don't want that manual effort that we want to do to manually correlate these findings or results that come out of individual security services. So disconnected security signals that required manual analysis was the second main thing that customers told us. The third was limited context. So typically, our security services were focused on a resource or were focused on a specific thing. It lacked some of the business context and general context around the overall risk that presented to an organization. Last year at re:Invent, within Amazon Guard Duty, we did launch extended threat detection that linked together multiple threats that happened within the same time frame to give you a high confidence results. The third is, or like the fourth one that we heard consistently was that we want to simplify our response. Response could be remediation. Response could be just opening up a ticket. And a lot of the times, one of the things we did was that we provided building blocks. There was always something to do, but you had to manually stitch them together. For example, if you had to create a connection or a ticketing connection with a ticketing system like ServiceNow or Jira, you had to manually create an event bridge rule, you had to manually create an SES queue, and then eventually do a lot of the steps to end up setting that connection up. So while it's not hard, it is something that customers consistently told us, we want a simple way that we can do from within the tool, like we want native integrations. So we talked about multiple tools. We talked about manual analysis, context, and delayed response. So what we are doing now is we are addressing each one of those with a unified solution. We are doing automated correlation and analysis. We are giving enriched insights into each and every risk that we generate. We also are streamlining our response. This is a preview, so we are starting with some response capabilities like integration with ticketing systems, and we'll go over that during our detailed session in a few minutes, and we will also show that in a demo, so that it's very clear how we are doing it within a few clicks. So with that, we are introducing our preview of our new Security Hub, which does a bunch of things. And this will be our unified security solution that will ingest findings from Guard Duty, Inspector, Security Hub, existing Security Hub. It will look at the configurations, even if there are signals that are not good enough for a misconfiguration finding. There are still configuration when in relation with multiple other aspects could prove to be harmful. Then there is network exposure to the internet, or it could be a general reachability from a code execution standpoint. Then sensitive data, then also resource relationship. How a resource like EC2 instance can assume an IAM role could be very critical. So just understanding the resource relationships is equally important to our security findings. So our vision going forward with the new Security Hub is that everything that you need within AWS around security will be available within AWS Security Hub. So what happens with our existing Security Hub? Basically, the vision and the path we are going forward is that the existing Security Hub will be renamed to Security Hub CSPM to focus on cloud security posture management. Existing Security Hub did two things mainly. First, it provided security controls or checks against AWS security best practices. And the second was the aggregation of findings. That will continue to exist. And that product will focus on building the best checks, the fastest checks to the market for all AWS security services that we have. And it will continue to focus on that area, while the new Security Hub will be truly a security hub this time and will give a unified solution for security that not only means detections, it means automated correlations, it also means risk prioritization, and finally, automated response. And the response could cover across several areas like ticketing or automated ticketing. So what are the key capabilities of the new Security Hub? We have introduced a new entity, what we call exposure findings. And we'll go over details of exposure findings with an example in a minute. But exposure findings is essentially the toxic combination of things that we identified in your environment, which could be from resource relationships to findings such as software vulnerabilities like CVEs. It could be network exposure. It could be code. It could be in a code execution path. It could be sensitive data. It could be just a configuration. When we generate an exposure finding, we will accompany that with a visual of a potential attack path, which represents that how a potential attacker could essentially get into your environment and exploit that resource. Now, this doesn't have to be always through the internet. This can be just ways an attacker could exploit just getting into your system through backdoors and so forth and so on. So there are multiple ways it could happen. So with this visual, we are able to present how a potential attacker could actually exploit your resource and the path it would take. The third is the asset inventory. Now, our approach to asset inventory is very security focused. So we are looking at security focused resource inventory, where you will be able to see all the resources that exist in your AWS environment that are being monitored by AWS Security Hub or one of our detection engines. So when I say detection engines, these are services or our security capabilities or components like guard duty, inspector, and so forth and so on. Then finally, we do a lot of the triage and analysis upfront for you so that you can automatically do or take response actions. And this could happen through automation rules and several automated actions that you can take. So how this fits into overall security portfolio? Like I mentioned, Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, AWS Security Hub CSPM, and Amazon Macie will be the main detection engines to start with. That will provide signals to AWS Security Hub. We will also get signals from, like I mentioned, resource relationships or configuration itself. But those don't present as findings in itself. Now, our idea is that if you still want to just use building blocks and build a solution on top of it, you will be able to just use each and individual services that are offered today. So you can still go and buy AWS Security Hub CSPM or Inspector or Guard Duty and build a solution over it if that's what works best for you. But if you want a unified solution, a whole unified solution where you can do detection and response, that will be our AWS Security Hub, the new AWS Security Hub. It is in preview, and the new Security Hub itself will be free of charge during the preview period. Now I'll have Scott come and talk about the details of this new product and do a demo.
Thanks, Ashish. Morning, everybody. Thank you for your time, and thanks for coming out here today. Let's take a little bit of tour and talk more about the capabilities that are inside of Security Hub. I'm going to quickly talk about these. I've got a demo where I'm going to dive more deeply into these, but to kind of set the stage for it. The first thing that we focused on with this new Security Hub is a unified console. We want this to be the singular place where you can come in and get insight about your security findings. And so we focused on giving you this summary dashboard to start off with, which gets you a quick overview of what are the key items around threats, exposures, your summary of your top resources with findings, and as well as your security coverage of all the services that ultimately power Security Hub. We focused on this experience of giving you more usability, an overall improved user experience, and improved filtering capabilities. We also have the concept of exposure findings. Kashish touched on that briefly, and so what we're doing is we're doing correlation of all of these security findings that are coming into Security Hub and creating a net new exposure finding to help you with prioritization around where you should spend your time or where you might have the most risk in your environment across your resources. More specifically, let's just talk about what we view an exposure and how we accomplish generating you an exposure. So there's lots of different ways you could look at an exposure. I like to look at it as some sort of a weakness that you have in your environment. It's due to some sort of a misconfiguration, some sort of a security gap, or some sort of a vulnerability that exists in your resources or in your environment. The way that we're accomplishing this is that we're taking signals from a lot of different places. So we're taking the network reachability and the vulnerability findings that are coming from Inspector. We're taking the cloud posture management findings coming out of the Security Hub CSPM, sensitive data findings coming out of Amazon Macie, and we're taking information that we get around resource configuration and their relationships. And so we're taking all that and putting that into an engine, and the output of that is an exposure finding. So this is a net new finding that will exist in Security Hub. And we also focus on giving you, I think you saw on the screenshot, we have different severities for different exposures, from critical to high to medium to low. And so we use some different pieces of information to help set that severity. So we focused on the ease of discovery. So how easily could an automated tool actually discover this particular exposure? Ease of exploit, so how simple would it be for a threat actor to actually be able to exploit this particular vulnerability? The likelihood of the exploit, so focusing on what's the probability based on public information such as the EPSS score, the exploitability score, as well as internal threat intelligence that we have. The awareness, so publicly, how aware is the rest of the world and the rest of the community around this particular vulnerability? And then the impact. What would be the potential harm to your resources, to your environment, to your data, if this were to be successfully exploited? Let's talk about an example of an exploit, just to help talk a little bit more about what this means. So there's different parts of an exposure. So first, we have a vulnerability. So in this case, we have an EC2 instance. It has 125 different vulnerabilities on it. But in the end, when you really look at it, there's 2 vulnerabilities on that instance that have a high severity and they have a high likelihood of being exploited. Reachability, so actually identifying that this particular resource is reachable from the internet. Sensitive data, so we're getting signals from Macy that a particular S3 bucket has sensitive data, and we're also able to determine through the configuration part to determine that this particular resource has permissions to allow it to actually talk to that bucket where the sensitive data exists. And then things like misconfiguration, for example, identifying that your EC2 instance is still using IMDS v1, which has some gaps that might allow somebody to get access to information about the metadata for your resource, for your instance, or actually get the credentials for that instance that might allow them to actually interact with things like that S3 bucket that's public and has sensitive data. So this is an example of like the different types of signals and things that we're pulling out of the findings to arrive at an exposure. We'll talk through some exposures in the demo here in just a minute as well. So what are some of the benefits of what we're doing from our exposure correlation? So the first one is really, we're giving you prioritized findings. We're giving you the most important resources in your environment that you should be focusing on. We're eliminating the need for you to comb through and go through all these individual findings and try to make that decision on your own. Free up some resources to actually maybe focus on responding to these exposures rather than trying to find them. That results in low operational overhead. We're the ones who are taking care of running these exposures, coming up with new ways to identify these exposures. You just to focus on remediating them and running your environment and actually maybe addressing the root cause of these. We have an intelligent approach to this, and we're really focusing on best practices. And so we're using our insight of what's the best way to run and configure and use resources on AWS and applying that to how we're generating these exposures. When it comes to the vulnerabilities, we're using both external threat intel, so I mentioned the EPSS score, what's the probability of this vulnerability being exploited, information from our partners such as Recorded Future around what's happening with particular vulnerabilities and how are they being exploited. But we're also using our own internal threat intel. So if you watched the keynote yesterday, you heard Amy mention MadPot, which is one of our internal security services that we actually use to collect virtual honeypot information around what are malicious actors doing against AWS environments. And we actually use some of that information around how threat actors are exploiting and using certain vulnerabilities to inform our insight on what's the likeliness that this particular vulnerability would be exploited. And then we're using our automated reasoning capabilities to actually help identify network reachability. So automated reasoning is a discipline that we have within several of our services here at AWS that helps us to get to a binary yes or no answer of can this particular resource access the internet, looking at all the potential control plane configurations that could exist for that resource. Other key capabilities, you heard the attack path mentioned earlier, and so within an exposure, we're giving you a visualization of what is the possible way that an adversary could actually get access to the particular resource that this exposure is ultimately for, but also helping you understand what are maybe some of the other related resources, what are some of the other things that might be at risk if the core resource were to be exposed, for example, storage or other IAM permissions that are attached to that particular resource that somebody might use to either gain further access to your environment or cause further destruction. We also focus on giving you a security-focused resource inventory. So giving you that inventory of what are all the resources that you have deployed that are covered by the security services that power Security Hub. The really cool thing here is that if you're integrating with AWS organizations, this is an organization-wide view. So you can now, whether you're looking for security findings or not, come in and get a sense of how much of any particular resource type do I have deployed, which ones of them have security findings against them, what kinds of security findings do they have, and what's the configuration of all of those resources. And you can get all that without having to pivot out to another console or to another account to actually go and get that information. Being able to respond to all the findings that you have in Security Hub is really important, and we wanted to make sure that we were positioning this service so that it could work with how customers integrate these findings into their operational workflows. And so we focused on native integration with key ticketing tools. We started out with Jira Cloud and ServiceNow, and so now customers can actually configure a connection in Security Hub to their Jira or their ServiceNow environments. And then we will synchronously create findings into tickets in those particular environments. And so it's a native integration. You don't have to write event bridge rules to be able to integrate those with your ticketing tools. Like as I mentioned, it's synchronous, and so you can go into an individual finding and choose create a ticket right there. Or from a scalability perspective, you can actually define automation rules where you define criteria and say when a finding matches this criteria, I'd like you to create a ticket in one of the ticketing integrations I have. Another key thing with Security Hub, so Security Hub is now a separate service that you enable independent of CSPM. The data store behind that is all based on the Open Cybersecurity Framework schema. So the old Security Hub CSPM was based on the AWS Security Findings format. We're now basing this on OCSF. And so this allows us to have more rich information in all of your security findings, a lot more detail, a lot more information. It also allows you as a customer to, if you're already using OCSF and some of your other processes or other tools, to integrate those findings with what you're already doing for OCSF, or if you're going to use a third party who's already standardized or is supporting OCSF to adopt that third party. And on that list, we have a collection of partners who have already committed to building integrations to consume findings out of Security Hub and make those findings available and useful to you in their products, as well as a few partners who have already committed to offering enablement services for customers who are looking to adopt Security Hub. So when it comes to operationalization, a couple different ways that you can look at how you would operationalize the data that's coming into Security Hub. The first one is the console, which we'll spend a few minutes on here to just kind of walk through what you get in the console, but just using the console to be able to look at your findings, all the information that we've given you there. You can also actually get a copy of the raw JSON OCSF information about each individual finding if you want it, but you can use the console to investigate and use that as your first point to be able to make some decisions. We'll also have APIs for all of the key capabilities of Security Hub, so you can use the APIs not only to extract or to look at information, but also to do things like maybe update the status of a particular finding, setting it to closed, or changing the severity, or adding a comment to that particular finding so that you can incorporate some of those updates into your workflows. And then Amazon Event Bridge integration, so a copy of every single finding that Security Hub generates or updates will be sent to Amazon Event Bridge. And so you can write Event Bridge rules that will match certain criteria in those findings, and then you can route those on to a particular target, which could be an SNS topic, an SQSQ, a Lambda function, to incorporate or do some sort of work on that particular finding, or you could even incorporate that with a third party. Any of the third party partners who have onboarded as an Event Bridge partner, you can actually set their system as a target and provide your credentials to be able to send that finding to their environments. One of the other things that we've focused on is a simplified onboarding process when it comes to Security Hub. So Security Hub is integrated with AWS organizations, and so you can get visibility across your entire organization. So to onboard here, you go into your organizational management account, you turn on Security Hub, you set your delegated administrator account, and then you get out of that organizational management account. You don't need to be back in there again. You then go into your delegated admin account, you enable Security Hub. It's 2 clicks to enable Security Hub at your delegated admin. Now at that point, you have your delegated admin account where you're going to be able to see all the information for your member accounts that you've enabled Security Hub. So what happens if you've got lots of member accounts? You don't want to go into each one of those and actually enable Security Hub. You don't want to do some scripting to call a bunch of APIs to enable Security Hub in all your member accounts. And you certainly don't want to have to continue to do that as you add more accounts to your organizations. So we have a capability where in the delegated administrator account, you'll go in and you'll define a policy. In that policy, you'll go in and say which AWS accounts of all of my members, which accounts do I want enabled? The default is all accounts, but you can choose specific accounts or specific organizational units in your organization. Then you're going to choose which AWS regions. So you can choose all regions, or you can choose specific regions that you operate in. And then once you submit that policy, behind the scenes, we go and apply that policy to all your member accounts and enable all of the member accounts with Security Hub. As you add more member accounts, any more member accounts that match that policy will automatically have Security Hub enabled as well. Now, many of our customers, probably many people in this room as well, operate across multiple AWS regions. So the next challenge is how do I actually go in and get visibility across all those regions? So we have a capability called region aggregation. And so you can actually go into Security Hub, you can define a home region, whichever region you want to be able to see all your findings in, and then define which of your other regions should be linked to that home region. And we will then sync a copy of all those findings into that home region. And so what you end up with is you have the ability to go into one single account, your delegated admin account, and be able to view all of your organization's security findings across all accounts and all regions from one delegated home region. So pretty cool from a visibility perspective. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the product and take you through a tour of what we have. Okay, so to start off with, as Kashish mentioned earlier, the Security Hub you've known for the last 5 years is now been rebranded as Security Hub CSPM. So if you go into Security Hub CSPM, you'll see a new banner around introducing the new Security Hub, which is in preview. So you can click on that Try Security Hub. That will bring up the brand new console. So if you haven't enabled it yet, you'll go through those enable steps that I talked about earlier. But we've got it enabled here. So what do we have here now that we've come into this? So we have the summary screen that we talked about. Some more detail about this. We have a threat summary, an exposure summary, your resource summary, and your security coverage. Threats are focused on guard duty. So as soon as you have Security Hub enabled, if you have guard duty enabled, all your guard duty findings will flow into Security Hub. We're organizing those for you so that you have clear visibility around what are all the threats that are happening in my organization. Right there, right on the left, very clearly, easy for you to be able to see them. Exposures, we talked about what exposures are. This is a summary of all of the exposures that are currently active or that we can see in your environment. For each of these, we'll give you a summary listing of each of the findings of like the top 10 findings that are tied to this particular dashboard. And we'll talk about how you can go see those in more detail in just a moment. This resource summary, this is actually a top 10 list of all the resources organized by findings. And so we're prioritizing the exposure findings and the extended threat detection findings of guard duty. So if you use guard duty or if you haven't used guard duty, extended threat detection findings are the ones where they're actually correlating multiple guard duty findings into a new finding that's a broader attack sequence that they're seeing in your environment. So we're prioritizing those prioritized findings because we have a lot more signals that these may be the ones you want to focus on, and using that to organize what are the top resources with security findings. And then finally, the security coverage. So Security Hub is powered by other AWS services, Inspector, Macie, Security Hub CSPM, and Guard Duty. So we're giving you visibility around where you might have a coverage gap with those security services, which would imply that you're not getting the full visibility around findings or exposures or threats in your environment. One of the other cool things that we've done here throughout the product, and I'll show it here in the dashboard, is that we've added a lot more filtering capabilities. And so I'm going to just go ahead and add a quick filter here around resource type. In this case, I'm going to focus on EC2 instances. Okay, and immediately you'll see that the counts on this dashboard change. One of the really cool things with these filters is if I've set a filter that I like, I can actually go in and save that filter. And if I wanted to, I can set this as my default filter view. And what that means is every time I come into Security Hub and as I navigate through Security Hub, that will stay as my filter. So if that's something I really want to focus on, I can set that and keep it. And I can define as many filters as I want. So if I have different teams that are coming into Security Hub and they want to look at things different ways based on different attributes, they can choose a filter that's applicable to them. So we have these filters that you can live with, you can use throughout the environment. So building on that, let's take a look at the threats in a little bit more detail. And so when you click on any one of those numbers in the summary, it will immediately bring you to a dashboard that's filtered based on that severity level that you just chose. So you can see I'm being brought in to a list of threats that are just critical because I clicked on the critical number. One of the things we've done, I talked about the user experience earlier, is that we have focused on making sure that you can really get value out of all of the finding information in the console. And so if you ever looked at a guard duty finding in the Security Hub CSPM console, many customers are finding that they had to pivot back to the guard duty console because all the information was maybe there in the JSON, but it wasn't really relevant or visible in the console. And so if you look at the Security Hub console now, a guard duty finding in Security Hub looks just like if you were looking at the finding in guard duty. So you have all the full information. And where you can really see this is the guard duty attack sequences, where there's lots of different signals and lots of different information that's being presented. So we can see I've got an attack sequence that's focused on a compromised cluster in EKS, which Guard Duty just released new capabilities yesterday around generating attack sequences around EKS clusters. So we can see information about the attack sequence. I can see the different MITRE tactics that Guard Duty is observing, all the indicators, the endpoints, and the resources that are tied to that. So really helping you get information that you need and really doubling down on that unified console experience so you can just stay in Security Hub to be able to look at all of your findings. Let's talk about exposures. So in this case, I'm actually going to go to the exposure-specific dashboard. So this is a dashboard that is built specifically for exposures. It's sorting and organizing it just on exposure findings. And right away, what we're giving you here is a summary of key information about all your exposures. So once again, all the different severities that we're seeing for your exposures, and what are the top 10 attributes, the different resources, account IDs, and things like that that we're seeing across all of these findings, as well as your top 10 accounts that are in your that are tied to these particular exposure findings. So I can click on critical here, and I can see the information about a particular exposure. Or, actually want to show you something really cool here. We can actually group by the finding title, which will then help me understand what are all the different types of exposures that I have out there. And I can actually then expand this and see the specific resources that are tied to that particular exposure title. So we're going to focus on this critical one here, for example, for this particular EC2 instance. So when I bring this up, we can see an expanded pane here on the right. I'm actually going to move to the expanded view so that we can see all the information about this particular exposure. So we start off with by giving you a quick title to help you understand this. So in this case, we have a potential credential stealing exposure where we have an EC2 instance that's reachable from the internet. Remember, we talked about internet reachability being one of the key contributors here. And it has an instance profile tied to it, and it has a network exploitable software vulnerability that's part of that instance. So it's giving it a high likelihood that this resource could be exploited. We've got a more deeper human readable description about this particular exposure, helping you understand more of like why did we generate this exposure in the first place, and what are some of the key things that exist in this exposure. Then giving you an overview of some key information about this exposure, so the type of exposure, the resource that's impacted, the account and the region, and how old is this particular exposure. And then we go into the traits. And so contributing traits are the key attributes that we extracted out of the findings that we used to correlate this exposure. And these are the things that ultimately led us to generating this exposure. And I look at these as your roadmap for remediating or reducing this particular exposure in your environment. So we have a case where we have an EC2 instance with a profile. So there's potential of credentials or permissions that could be used off of that resource. The instance is reachable over the internet, and the instance has a high severity vulnerability tied to it. We then follow up with remediation guidance. So we give you guidance on, based on the traits that we saw for this particular exposure, this is links to documentation about how we recommend you go about remediating this particular exposure and identifying the things that we found for this particular resource. We also give you a potential attack path. So we talked about the attack path briefly. I'm going to go into it a little bit more here. We use the information we have about that particular resource to give you, in this case it's an EC2 instance, an overview of what are the network components and how could a malicious actor actually get to and interact with this resource. We also have the primary resource indicated here, which is the resource that the exposure finding ultimately is for. In this case, it's an EC2 instance. And this little counter over here is a counter of the number of traits that exist for that particular resource. I can also click on this particular resource and see more information about those traits if I wanted to. If there was more than one resource that had traits that resulted in the exposure, each one of those resources would have a counter next to it. I can click on any one of these resources and get some key information about that resource, or pivot to the overall resource details, which I'll show you in just a minute. So we have the attack path to help you understand how is this configured, what are all the related resources tied to this particular item. We also show you another view of the traits. One of the key things here is that we talk about contributing traits. Those are the traits that actually generated the exposure. But we also give you contextual traits. These are all the other findings that exist there about this particular resource. They didn't contribute to the exposure, but if you were going to go in and try to do more of a broad remediation or patch against this particular resource, these are all the other security issues that are out there that you might want to address as well when you would go in and focus on this resource. And then we give you detail about the primary, the primary resource and any secondary resources that are associated with this particular exposure. So in this case, it's an EC2 instance. So we've given you a couple of pieces of information, the type, the ID of the resource, and the region. We give you the tags, which is important so that you can actually understand maybe some configuration or some ownership. But a lot of customers need a lot more information to be able to truly understand what's the scope of this resource, how is it configured, is it configured correctly? And so we talked about that security-focused resource inventory. We're actually going to give you a full overview of all the configuration information for this particular resource so that you can make a determination of, is this actually configured correctly? What are the configuration details? How might use that as far as formulating the remediation of this particular exposure? And so we've eliminated the need for you to have to pivot out to another console or to another account in order to be able to go see that resource information. Okay, so let's talk about, let's go back to exposures. Let's just pick an exposure. So one of the things we talked about was the ability to have native ticketing integration. So we talked about we have integrations with Jira Cloud and ServiceNow. So you can define a connection to your ticketing environment. When I'm looking at a particular finding, if I decide that, hey, this needs to get turned into a ticket, from right here, I can choose Create Ticket. I can choose either of the ticketing providers. So if I've chosen Jira in this case, I can then choose which of the integrations or the connections that I've created for Jira, choose that one, and right here, choose Create. And what's happened is we're synchronously sending this via the REST APIs to the Jira environment, and we will then add the ticket number or the issue number directly to that finding. And so now you have a couple of things. One, you can actually click on this and it will take you to the Jira environment if you want to look at the ticket in there. It also gives you an indicator that, okay, this has already been created into a ticket. Maybe I don't need to focus on this anymore because it's already in the hands of the team that is responsible for this. And so a really great way to just insert these findings into your operational workflows. Now, going through and looking at all these findings one-on-one is probably not going to scale pretty easily. And so the other thing that you can do is we have this feature called automation rules. So I have one defined here, but I can walk you through how this works. So I've got an automation rule defined where I've given it a criteria where I want to focus on any finding that comes in with a status of critical. I want this to create a ticket. And in this case, I've chosen my ServiceNow integration. And so what's going to happen is that every new finding that's created in Security Hub that has a status of critical will just automatically be sent off to my ServiceNow environment. So there's no need for me to go through and triage every one of these findings. I'm able to get findings with certain criteria immediately off into the right place so that the operational processes that are tied to that can begin. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about real quick is that, let's get back here, is that security-focused inventory. So up to this point, I've been talking about specific findings. I was looking at an exposure for an EC2 instance. So I want to understand more about like what's up with all the other EC2 instances. How many do I have out there? Is there a potential that some of the other EC2 instances might have security findings against them as well? So this resource-focused inventory, this is all the resources that are deployed across your organization that are covered by our security services. So in this case, I'm going to open up Compute. I'm going to focus on EC2 instances. I can see I have 27 EC2 instances that are deployed across my organization. And so I'm going to go in and I can see immediately I'll get a list of all of the instances. I'll also get information about which ones have findings and what types of findings exist about those instances. So right away I've got another signal around where might I spend my time. Do I want to focus on more EC2 instances or not? I'll also see if there's no findings at all. And so, okay, this one's out there, it's good. And then if I choose any one of these instances, just like when we were looking at the individual finding, I'll have the complete overview of the configuration of that particular resource. And so I can use that to once again make some determination of, is this resource configured correctly, or who do I hand this off to, if depending on the configuration of that resource. I can also see information about the particular findings that are tied to that resource. And also, if there's been any exposures created, I can also see the traits of the exposures tied to that resource. So lots of different ways to get some visibility around the resources in your environment and help you make some decisions around where you're going to spend your time or what you should prioritize. Okay, so going to wrap up here. Some key capabilities that you want to keep in mind when it comes to Security Hub CSPM versus the new Security Hub. And so, first of all, from a CSPM perspective, Security Hub CSPM focuses on cloud posture management, configuration compliance, and security finding aggregation. AWS Security Hub focuses on those three things, as well as giving you automated signal correlation, exposure findings, the attack path analysis, security-focused asset inventory, everything in the OCSF finding format, and a unified configuration console, which will be available at GA, where you'll actually be able to configure all those supporting AWS services directly from the Security Hub console. Once we release the slides for this after the presentation, there'll also be another slide with links to some key documentation around this service, as well as a couple of customer quotes. I just want to highlight we had some great partners that were part of our preview. So customers ITV and Acelia gave us some quotes that just highlighted that how Security Hub is already helping them to get better insight into their environments and help to streamline their security operations in what they're doing on AWS. Lastly, there were a lot of people who made this new service possible. So I'd like to just thank everybody from an engineering, a marketing, a legal standpoint at AWS who helped to produce this and provide this service to you. I'd like to thank Kashish for his support and his guidance as well. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out here today. So thank you very much for your time. Kashish and I can hang out here and take some questions for you right here from the stage. If you have any questions, we'll happily take them now. All right, well, we'll be back out here in a couple minutes if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.